My name is Damon Whitlock, and until tonight, I thought I understood what it meant to work a simple night shift. Security gigs come and go, warehouses, parking structures, the occasional office building, but nothing in my experience prepared me for the first hour I spent inside the old Fairview Mall. The place has been closed for 9 years, shuttered after a structural fire damaged part of the east wing. Most people in town assume it's condemned, but as I learned during my brief onboarding, a development company recently bought the property and needed overnight security to keep squatters out before renovations begin. The interview was absurdly short, the background check even shorter, and the hourly rate was generous enough to make me ignore the parts that felt off. I arrived just before sunset, the last orange light glinting off the sea of cracked asphalt. My boots crunched on weeds that had erupted through the pavement, and the wind carried the hollow sound of something metallic shifting inside the mall's husk. At first glance, it didn't seem too bad, just old. But the longer I stood there, the more I felt the weight of its emptiness pushing outward, like a pressure in my ears. I chalked it up to nerves and the echo of the day cooling into night. Still, I didn't linger outside. The property manager had given me a single brass key, a tiny radio, and instructions so vague they might as well have been directions to a grocery store. The front entrance was a pair of heavy glass doors long since dusted over. When I inserted the key and pushed, the sound of the hinges groaning reverberated across the lobby like a warning. The air inside was colder than it should have been. Not crisp, but stale, like it had been sitting still for years without being disturbed. Most malls smell like popcorn and perfume. This one smelled like wet drywall and old coins. The only light came from the spill of my flashlight, its beam slicing through the darkness in a narrow white cone. The manager told me the rollout would be simple. Walk the perimeter corridors twice a night, check for broken windows or signs of entry, avoid the collapsed east wing for safety reasons, and never, he emphasized never, power up the intercom panel in the security office. When I asked why, he smiled without humor and said it hadn't worked since the fire. His tone, however, carried something else. Something like "don't ask." I made my way toward the central atrium, my boots sending soft echoes up into the vast open space. The mall was built in the late 70s, all concrete planters, sunken seating pits, and ornamental rails. Without sunlight, those features felt fossilized, like remnants of a place that once had purpose but now existed only as an afterthought. A plastic Christmas wreath still hung from the upper balcony, its faded ribbon dangling like a torn ligament. Underneath it, the abandoned fountain sat bone-dry, ringed with stains where water once had been. Every step I took felt too loud. The stillness swallowed the noise and gave nothing back, as if the building wasn't big enough to contain its own silence. I swept my flashlight over storefronts, reading the ghosts of their old signs. Brookshire shoes, gadget time, Silver Palace jewelry. A once busy world paused in mid-motion, left behind by everyone except me. Halfway through my first circuit, I heard something. It wasn't dramatic, not a bang or a crash, just the softest scrape, like the heel of a shoe dragging across tile. Came from somewhere near the food court. I froze, listening. In my line of work, you learn to distinguish between natural settling noises and human movement. This wasn't the building adjusting to temperature drop. It was too controlled, too intentional. When I swung the light toward the corridor leading to the food court, the beam caught only dusty benches and overturned trash cans. But the sound had been real enough to send a bright prickle of adrenaline down my spine. Possibly raccoons, I told myself, or a loose sign rattling in the draft. Anything except a person, because if it was a person, then they'd gotten in without triggering any external alarms. I advanced slowly, the kind of slow where your breath shortens without you telling it to. My boots brushed against old wrappers, some so brittle they crumbled underweight. The food court appeared, a ring of abandoned eateries with faded menus still taped above their counters. Chairs were stacked upside down on tables, though a few had toppled over, the metal legs bent at odd angles. In the center sat a round cluster of tables, and for a moment, the silence settled again. Then something flickered. Not a shadow, not movement. A single fluorescent light above the former sandwich shop glowed weakly, just for a second, before snapping back into darkness. The power to this building was supposed to be completely shut off except for the security office. My flashlight beam lingered on the dead fixture. The hair on the back of my neck rose with a slow, creeping awareness. Lights don't flicker when there's no electricity. I leaned in closer, trying to catch any hum or signal. Nothing. Just the cold, quiet air pressing around me. I scanned the floor for footprints, but the layer of dust was too uneven to hold clear impressions. I lifted my radio, more for comfort than necessity. Static. No chatter. I hadn't expected any. On my way back toward the atrium, I heard the scrape again, the same dragging footstep, but this time it came from behind me. Reflex shoved me into a half-turn. Flashlight extended like a shield. The beam caught nothing but darkness stretching behind the vacant food stalls. The sound had been close. Close enough that I should have seen something. But the corridor remained empty, undisturbed. I told myself to breathe, to stay grounded. Old buildings make noises. Air moves. Metal settles. It all felt reasonable, right up until I noticed the Christmas wreath hanging above the balcony again. It was turning, not spinning from wind, not swaying from vibration, turning slowly, deliberately, as if someone unseen were holding its bottom edge and twisting it. And that was when I realized the cold air wasn't from lack of heating. It was the feeling of something watching me. The moment I saw that wreath turning, every instinct I had, from years of night shifts, bar fights, one regrettable stint working hospital security, screamed at me to leave. But fear has a strange way of pinning you in place. My flashlight stayed glued to the wreath, following its slow rotation as if I needed to confirm I wasn't imagining it. The air underneath the balcony felt heavier, like the atmosphere thickened with each degree the wreath moved. When it finally stopped, angled slightly toward me as if acknowledging my presence, I backed up one step, then another. I forced myself to look for rational explanations. Maybe the ventilation system kicked on. Maybe the fixture was loose. Maybe I was tired and my eyes were playing tricks on me. Except none of that lined up with what I saw in the dust below the balcony. The floor was layered with a soft gray film, undisturbed except for a single faint line. A fresh line, tracing outward beneath the wreath, as though something had dragged its hand across the ground and then lifted it. I didn't want to get closer, but being a guard means doing exactly that. I walked around the planters, keeping my light trained on the balcony. The flash beam caught flecks floating in the air, dust disturbed seconds ago. I scanned the railing, the floor, the corners. Nothing. But the building didn't feel empty anymore. It felt inhabited, like someone else had chosen this moment to breathe with me, move with me, wait with me. I continued the rest of the perimeter, my pace quicker, each footstep sounding too sharp in the cavernous halls. Storefronts stared blindly with their shuttered gates. Mannequins slumped in abandoned display windows, their plastic faces blurred from grime. More than once I caught myself turning abruptly, sure I'd seen movement at the edge of my vision. Each time, nothing. Just darkness shaped like a person, or a shadow that didn't align with the direction of my light. When I finally reached the security office on the west side of the mall, I felt a little safer. Not by much, but enough. The room was small, paneled in old imitation wood, with a battered desk, a metal filing cabinet, and an ancient CCTV setup that looked like it hadn't been updated since dial-up internet. A faint hum came from the breakers along the back wall, the only authorized electricity in the entire mall. On the desk sat a binder labeled incident log. I flipped it open, expecting reports of trespassers or minor vandalism. Instead, the entries grew sparse after the mall closed 9 years ago. Then, abruptly, they stopped entirely until 6 months ago when the development company purchased the property. There were only 4 entries since then, all 4 handwritten by different guards, all 4 short, all 4 unsettling. Unexplained footsteps near atrium, no subject found. Heard whispering in north corridor, possibly vagrants, but search yielded no one. Lights flickered in east wing despite no power. Avoided area due to structural hazard. Something moved above the food court. Not sure if human. The final entry. Request reassignment. Terminate placement at Fairview effective immediately. No signature, just those words. I sat back in the chair, letting the weight of that sink in. My flashlight rested on the desk, the beam angled toward the wall. Dust motes drifted lazily through the light, but a subtle vibration trembled through the floor, like a heavy footstep landing somewhere in the building. Then another, then one more, slower, as though something was pacing. I reached for the CCTV monitor. Only 3 cameras were still functional: the main atrium, the north hall, and the security entrance. The other screens flickered static. I tapped the buttons, switching between them. Empty hallways, still darkness, no movement, nothing pacing. The vibration continued, though not loud, not violent, but steady enough that I felt it through my boots. I switched back to the atrium feed, squinting. The balcony came into view, the place where the wreath still hung. Except it wasn't hanging anymore. It was lying on the floor directly beneath the camera's frame. My pulse jumped. I leaned closer. The wreath lay at a slight angle, like it had been gently placed rather than dropped. A darker shape stretched beneath it, that same faint line in the dust I had seen earlier, but longer now, extending several feet past the camera's edge as though something had dragged the wreath from one point to another. I swallowed hard. Earthquake? I whispered to myself, knowing full well there hadn't been one. I pushed away from the monitors. I needed to finish my second circuit. I needed to show myself that the mall was just old, just creaking from age. I grabbed my flashlight, stepped into the hall, and forced my breathing to stay even. As I walked, the temperature dipped noticeably, enough that a thin fog formed when I exhaled. My breath floated visibly, dissipating too slowly in the still air. The halls felt narrower on my second pass, the shadows deeper. My flashlight beam jittered slightly from tension. I couldn't steady my hand. At one point, I thought I heard faint music, the distant echo of a mall jingle from decades ago. But when I paused to listen, it dissolved into silence. I kept moving. When I reached the atrium again, I paused at the balcony rail, shining my light downward. The wreath was indeed on the floor, but something else was there too. Something small, metallic, reflecting my beam. I descended the central stairs slowly, hyper-aware of every echo. When I reached the bottom, I crouched to inspect the object. A key, not mine. A small, tarnished silver key with a red plastic tag cracked in half. The remaining piece of the tag had one faded letter on it. A G. The moment I picked it up, something changed in the mall's atmosphere. Not colder, heavier. Like the air had thickened again. Like I had disturbed something I wasn't meant to touch. I pocketed the key out of instinct, but the second it disappeared into my jacket, a sound broke the silence. A single, deliberate footstep on the balcony above me. I snapped my flashlight upward. No one was there, but dust drifted down in a slow, lazy fall, as if someone had been standing right at the edge, just seconds before I looked. The dust falling from the balcony caught the beam of my flashlight like drifting snow, each particle turning lazily in the cold air before disappearing into the shadows around me. My mind kept trying to insert a shape up there, a silhouette, anything to make sense of the footstep I'd heard. But the balcony was empty, so empty it felt staged, like whoever, whatever, had moved was intentionally staying one step out of sight. I held my breath longer than I should have, waiting for another sound. When none came, I forced my lungs to work again and slowly backed away from the center of the atrium. The key in my pocket felt heavier than a key should ever feel. Weighted, warm even, as if it had been in someone's hand not long before mine. The cracked red tag digging into my palm through my jacket made me even more uneasy. A single letter G. I tried to think of what that could stand for. Gate, generator room, ground level, or maybe someone's name. I moved toward the corridor leading to the western wing. My flashlight bounced off broken posters in glass frames, faded advertisements for stores that didn't exist anymore. Every few steps, I thought I heard something walking behind me. Soft, steady, evenly spaced. But each time I turned around, my light caught nothing except miles of stillness. I convinced myself it had to be echo, my own steps returning to me, Then the cold tightened around my throat again. Not a draft. Something about the air pressure shifting like the mall itself inhaled. I pressed forward faster. The west wing was the one with the smaller shops. A bookstore, a candle shop, a kiosk filled with what used to be sunglasses. At least here, the ceiling felt lower, the sensations less overwhelming. But just as relief began to tug at the edge of my thoughts, my flashlight flickered. Not out, just a pulse of dimming, like someone pinched the beam between two fingers before letting go. I tapped the flashlight body. It steadied. Good. Except I couldn't shake the sense that the darkness wasn't reacting to the light. The light was reacting to the darkness. I reached the end of the corridor and found a metal service door with a crack sign hanging crooked above it. Storage. Authorized personnel only. I wouldn't normally bother with it on my rounds, but something nudged me toward it. Curiosity, maybe, or the need to find something physical and grounded to break the rising panic twisting through my ribs. I tried the handle. Locked. Or it should have been, because when I pulled the silver key from my pocket and inserted it, the lock turned smoothly, almost eagerly, like the door had been waiting for it. A click, a soft hiss of cold air escaping. Then the door drifted open on its own. I tightened my grip on my flashlight and stepped inside. The storage room was narrower than expected, filled with old signage, deflated promotional balloons, mannequin limbs, rusted cleaning carts. A graveyard for forgotten pieces of the mall. My light passed over everything, and I swear some of the items looked like they'd been arranged recently. Not neatly, but intentionally. A mannequin torso faced the door. A stack of old sale signs formed a crude barrier near the back. A mop leaned upright instead of slumped. Things people touch, not things time preserves. I scanned the room more carefully. Dust lay thick everywhere except for a narrow path. A clean, deliberate path cutting through the clutter toward a metal shelf pressed against the back wall. My first instinct told me to leave. My second told me I needed to see what was on that shelf, because the path wasn't accidental. It was made by someone with a purpose. I walked the narrow line, each step cautious. The shelf held a row of unmarked cardboard boxes. I tugged at the nearest one. Lightweight, empty. The second, heavier, rattling faintly. I lifted the lid just enough to peek inside. Keys. Hundreds of keys. All different shapes, sizes, and metals. All tagged with broken red plastic labels with faded letters. My stomach dropped. The one in my pocket wasn't unique. It was part of a set. Before I could process that, something clattered behind me. A quick, sharp sound. Metal hitting tile. I spun around fast enough to send the flashlight beam skittering across the walls. Nothing moved. Nothing was different, except the storage room door. It was closing, not slamming, drifting shut with the slow silence of a hand guiding it. I lunged forward and grabbed the edge of the door just before it latched. The moment my fingers touched the metal, another sound echoed through the room. A soft, steady breathing. Not mine. Slow, deep, measured, coming from somewhere behind the shelves. I didn't wait. I pulled the door fully open and stumbled out into the corridor, twisting around to shine my light back into the room. The breathing stopped the instant my light crossed the threshold. Stopped so cleanly it felt rehearsed. The storage room stared back at me with that frozen, waiting emptiness I'd felt earlier. I shut the door hard and stepped back. Then I heard something new. Not breathing, not footsteps. A low, rhythmic clicking echoing lazily through the hall. I recognized the sound immediately, the distinct cadence of mall intercom speakers warming up. But the intercom system wasn't powered. Couldn't be powered. The property manager had insisted on that. The clicking grew louder, spreading through the pipes and ducts, traveling overhead like a message running through the mall's bones. It reached a peak, a bright electrical chirp, the unmistakable sound of a live line opening. Then a voice crackled through the overhead speakers. Not sharp, not shouting, just a calm, quiet male voice. "Damon, you're late." The flashlight trembled in my hand, because whatever spoke knew my name, and the intercom wasn't supposed to work at all. The voice from the intercom wasn't distorted. It wasn't warped by static or distance. It sounded close, Close enough that for a split second I thought someone stood directly behind me, whispering the words into the back of my neck. My pulse kicked hard, and I spun in a full circle, flashlight beams slicing through the corridor. Empty. Every storefront dark. Every hallway stretching into the same heavy stillness. The speakers overhead gave one more soft crackle before going silent again, leaving the faint echo of my own breathing hanging in the air. I reached for my radio on instinct, even though I knew damn well there was no one on the other end at this hour. Static. A weak hiss of sound. No human response. The flashlight shook slightly in my grip. Not from fear, I told myself, just the cold. But my hands weren't as steady as I wanted them to be. My name. Someone had used my name. The development company barely skimmed my paperwork. The property manager didn't even say my full name out loud. So who inside this dead mall knew it? I forced myself to start walking again. Standing still felt worse. Too exposed. The hallway ahead led back toward the atrium, but each step felt like I was moving deeper into the mall rather than returning to anywhere familiar. My footsteps echoed in a pattern that didn't quite match my pace, like there was a trailing rhythm a fraction of a beat behind me. When I reached the atrium, I kept my light trained upward toward the balcony where the wreath had been. The dust on the floor below it was unsettled again. The faint drag mark now stretched a few inches longer than before. I knelt and touched the floor. The dust was freshly disturbed. That meant whatever made the mark had done it while I was in the West Wing. Not minutes ago. Seconds. I eased away from the center of the atrium and forced myself toward the north corridor. The only part one hadn't walked yet on my second pass. Old skylights above me reflected dull patches of moonlight, but most were cracked or coated in grime so thick they looked painted over. The corridor funneled into a long stretch of shops. One of the storefronts used to be a toy store, faded murals of cartoon bears peeling away from the walls. Another had racks still inside, their metal frames casting spiderweb shadows across the floor. About 20 feet in, I saw something that made me stop. A footprint, clearer than anything I'd seen in the dust so far. The outline of a shoe, not a boot, a sneaker. A single step, heel indent deeper than the toe, like someone paused mid-stride. The dust around it showed faint smudging, as if something brushed past. I angled my light further down the hall. Another footprint, and another, each spaced evenly, leading toward the end of the corridor where a small escalator descended to the old cinema level. I crouched over the nearest print. It looked fresh. Too fresh. Dust inside the outline was thinner, like the impression had been made within the hour. My shift was the only one tonight. No one else should be here. My radio crackled again. This time, something faint came through. Not words, just a breath. A soft inhale, an even softer exhale, pressed into the line like someone was standing near the transmitter with the button half pressed. "Hello," I said quietly. No answer, just breathing. Then the line clicked off. I didn't waste time. I followed the footprints, slow and deliberate, trying to keep my breathing controlled. My flashlight caught the escalator railings. Both still, both silent. But when I reached the top step, the beam caught something on the metal panel. Grease. A fresh smear. Jagged, uneven. A handprint. Someone grabbed the rail on their way down. I leaned forward to shine the light deeper into the lower level. The escalator vanished into darkness. A clean, unbroken black, thick like fabric. I couldn't see the floor, couldn't see the cinema entrance, couldn't even see the bottom step. The darkness felt wrong. Not absence of light wrong, but heavy wrong. Like something lived in it. I hovered there too long. The silence stretched until it felt sharp. Then the escalator groaned. Just once. A long, low metallic creak, as if something heavy shifted near the bottom and pressed weight into the machinery. My throat tightened. This was where any reasonable night guard would call the police. But I did something irrational instead. I whispered, "Hello? Is someone hurt?" The darkness at the bottom of the escalator didn't answer, not directly. Instead, a faint clatter echoed from below. Something rolling. Something small. It hit a metal railing, bounced, and began a slow, lazy climb up the steps toward me. No, not climbed. Rolled. A coin. I watched it bounce from step to step until it hit my boot and settled on its edge before falling flat. I crouched, picked it up, and turned it over in my fingers. A quarter. Old. Worn. But warm. Unnervingly warm. Like someone had been holding it tight. I placed it in my pocket alongside the key. My fingers brushed the cracked red tag again. That uneasy warmth pulsed through both objects. Suddenly, the intercom crackled again. I straightened instinctively, turning toward the ceiling as the speakers gave a single, sharp pop. Then the same calm, male voice spoke. "Stop going where you don't belong." My jaw clenched. "Who are you?" A pause. Heavy. Deliberate. "You'll meet me soon." The line cut. Every hair on my arms lifted. Because that voice wasn't threatening. It was patient. I stepped away from the escalator, trying to regroup. But the moment I turned back toward the atrium, something was waiting for me. Not a person. Not a figure. A door. A single maintenance door standing open that had definitely not been open before, positioned at the exact midpoint of the corridor. Inside, I could see only black. But on the floor, just inside the threshold, lay something unmistakable. Another red plastic key tag, unbroken this time, and stamped with a full letter in faded white. S. 2 letters now. G and S. Something about that combination made my stomach twist. But before I could piece it together, a sound drifted from inside the darkened doorway. A whisper. Not words. Just the shape of breath-forming sound. As if someone was waiting only a few feet inside. Waiting for me to step closer. The whisper from inside the maintenance doorway wasn't loud. If anything, it was quieter than the soft scrape of dust shifting beneath my boots. But it had shape. Intention. It didn't sound like someone calling out. It sounded like someone listening. As if the act of my breathing near the door was enough to draw its response. I aimed my flashlight directly into the open doorway. The beam seemed to hit a wall of darkness instead of illuminating the room. The light should have cut through at least several feet, but instead it diffused, fading prematurely as if something in the air absorbed it. Not dust, not fog, something heavier. Something I didn't have a name for. I crouched to pick up the second key tag. The plastic felt dry and brittle, like it had spent years in storage, but the metal key attached was strangely clean. Stamped beside the letter S was a number. 14. GS. Keys labeled G and S14. I didn't know what they meant, but the fact they were leaving themselves in my path. That was deliberate. None of this felt random. Someone or something wanted me to find them. I pocketed the second key and stood again, keeping my back angled away from the open doorway. I didn't want whatever was inside to feel like I was offering myself. Yet I couldn't walk away without trying to understand it. I stood in the hall, waiting, listening, trying to catch any shift in movement from inside the darkness. That was when I heard it. Faint click, followed by another. Not from the doorway, from overhead, echoing through the ducts and speaker lines. The intercom system coming alive again, warming up, waking up despite having no power. My flashlight felt suddenly inadequate. Then the calm, male voice returned. This time so soft I had to hold my breath to hear it. "Damon, don't go in." The words paralyzed me. Not because he warned me off, but because the tone wasn't threatening anymore. It was pleading. I whispered, "Who are you?" A soft hum vibrated through the hall, like the speakers were straining to push more words through them. When the voice returned, it came fractured, almost strangled by static. "You shouldn't be here tonight." I stepped 1 inch closer to the door, the darkness inside shifting just enough that I couldn't tell if it was moving or if my eyes were adjusting. "Why? What's in there?" A beat. Then, "It watches the ones who stay." The hall grew colder. Sharp, constricting cold that tightened across my scalp and down my back. I angled my flashlight into the doorway again, determined to see something, anything, but the beam simply died against the dark, like shining a light into the throat of a canyon. The whisper inside the room grew louder, but only slightly. Not words. More like breath sliding over breath. A layered exhale that seemed to multiply the longer I listened. Not one person hiding inside. Several. or something mimicking the sound of several. I stepped back quickly, putting distance between me and the doorway. I didn't care what protocol said. I wasn't stepping inside. The intercom popped again. Then the voice, firmer now. "Leave it alone. Keep moving." My pulse hammered through my throat. "Tell me your name." A softer crackle. A single, long sigh from the speakers. "I can't." Before I could question him again, the lights above me flickered. Not once, twice, 3 times. This time, I knew with absolute certainty. There was still zero power to those overhead lights. The property manager had been explicit. Only the security office had electricity. So something else, something not wired into any breaker, was manipulating the mall systems. I backed toward the atrium again, forcing myself not to run. Running would be the moment I broke down completely, and I felt the edges of panic pushing too close already. I kept my flashlight steady, not because the light protected me, but because dropping it meant losing the only reference point I had in this sprawling dead maze. As I walked, I tried to piece the clues together. Keys with initials, footprints that didn't belong, breathing in a room with no air movement, a voice using the intercom with no power, a presence that left dust unsettled but never revealed itself. I didn't believe in ghosts, not in the traditional sense. I believed in people, dangerous, unpredictable people. But the longer I stayed in that mall, the more obvious it became that this wasn't a trespasser messing with me. No person could have moved that silently. No living, breathing man could have walked inches behind me without leaving clearer signs. And no one without a wired microphone could speak through dead speakers. By the time I reached the atrium again, my flashlight's beam felt different, duller, like even its battery was being drained faster inside this place. I pulled out my phone out of reflex, but there was no signal, not even a weak bar, and the time on the screen, which I checked when I first arrived, was stuck at 11:14 p.m. It hadn't changed, not once, as if time itself was refusing to move inside the mall. I shoved the phone back in my pocket and kept walking, forcing myself past the central fountain. The wreath remained where it last lay, but someone or something had moved it again. Not far, just rotated, facing me. My throat tightened painfully. The wreath wasn't turning randomly. It was being oriented, positioned, watching angles, tracking my movement every time I walked through the atrium. A sudden vibration pulsed through the floor, a dull, low thud that resonated through the tiles like a heavy foot landing somewhere deeper inside the mall. Then another, the third. Not footsteps this time. Something bigger, heavier, moving with slow deliberation. My flashlight flickered a second time, the beam narrowing until it was barely strong enough to cut through the dark. I smacked it against my palm, but it didn't help. The darkness around me thickened, clinging to the edges of the light like it wanted in. The intercom hummed weakly, fighting static. The voice came through once more, strained, panicked. "Damon, do not go to the East Wing." I froze instantly, because I hadn't been heading toward the East Wing. But something behind me was. I didn't turn around at first. Something deep inside me, older than logic, older than training, told me that turning around would be a mistake. A big one. The intercom hissed with static, as if the speakers were straining to push out more warnings. But no words followed. Just that electric hum that buzzed straight into my bones. I lifted my flashlight slowly, angling it over my shoulder without moving my body. The beam stretched across the atrium floor, shaking slightly from the tremor in my hand. For a moment, it showed nothing but empty space and drifting dust. Then the beam landed on something faint, a shadow that shouldn't have been there. It wasn't shaped like a person or any object I recognized. It was a vertical smear on the floor, darker than the surroundings, like someone had taken a brush dipped in deeper black and dragged it into a vague form. The edges of it seemed to ripple, as if reacting to the light. When the beam touched it directly, the shadow recoiled. Not quickly, not violently, but with a slow, deliberate withdrawal that mimicked a living creature pulling away from heat. I exhaled too loudly. The air left my lungs in a shaky burst that echoed through the atrium. In that split second, The shadow twitched, not toward me but sideways, gliding across the floor in a motion that was too smooth to belong to anything with limbs. It disappeared behind a row of defunct information kiosks, not leaving footprints, not disturbing the dust except in one sweeping arc. A deliberate path, straight toward the east wing. The wing that was supposed to be structurally unsafe. The wing with no power. The wing the voice told me to avoid. I wanted to follow protocol. Stay in lit areas, don't chase figures, stick to the designated safe zones. But there was no protocol for this. No handbook entry for shadow that moves without physics. And there was something else too, something crawling its way up my spine. If the east wing was truly unstable, why did the voice sound afraid of something inside it? I forced my feet to move, circling the atrium's edge to avoid the darkened middle. Every step sounded too loud, too alone. I kept the flashlight pointed forward but checked over my shoulder every few seconds, half expecting that shadow to reappear behind me. Didn't, but the sound behind me started anyway, a slow tapping on the tile, light, rhythmic, almost like fingertips. Tap, 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 tap. Not footsteps, not claws, something testing the floor. Feeling it, the tapping followed me as I moved toward the west hall again. Never speeding up, never slowing down. My throat tightened. The sound had a specific intelligence to it. Like whatever was making it knew I could hear it and enjoyed that fact. I passed the central fountain again. The wreath was gone. Not moved this time, gone. The tiles where it had rested were disturbed. Dust brushed in a tight half-circle around a central point. Like something had lifted the wreath straight upward and disappeared with it. The tapping stopped. The silence that followed was worse. It was too full, too heavy, like the air was listening for my next move. Then the intercom came alive again. A violent burst of static that made me flinch and slam my shoulder into a pillar. Damon! The voice cut off, replaced by a harsh crack. Then again, strained. It's moving, don't. The line died entirely. I didn't breathe for several seconds. Whatever was happening inside this mall, the one thing communicating with me, the one thing that seemed to understand the danger, was struggling to speak now. Drowning in interference. I'd barely taken 2 steps deeper into the West Hall when a new sound rippled through the mall. A groan. Not mechanical. Not natural. A low, resonant creaking that rolled through the walls and floor like the whole building had taken a single, shuddering breath. Dust drifted from the ceiling in thick curtains. The tiles under my feet vibrated. Every instinct told me to run, but the sound didn't continue. Shifted. A scraping. Long. Slow. Heavy. Something dragging. Something big enough to displace air. My flashlight flickered once, twice, and then steadied. But the beam dimmed by half, like the darkness was thickening and pushing back. I kept walking, each step shallow, my pulse punching in my ears. The corridor ahead bent slightly to the right, leading toward the maintenance hallway that looped around the cinema level. The shadow, whatever it was, had gone this way. I knew it. I felt it. The temperature dropped as I reached the bend. Not just cold, frigid. The kind of cold that burns your lungs when you inhale. A thin fog hung along the floor. My boots sliced through it, revealing faint patterns in the dust. Long, sweeping streaks. Drag marks. Not footprints. Not handprints. Marks as if something wide and heavy had been pulled, or had pulled itself, across the floor without lifting. I followed the drag trail slowly, painfully aware of how isolated this part of the mall was from the exits. A collapsed stairwell to the east, a blocked corridor behind me, shuttered storefronts with no windows. If something wanted to corner me, I was already exactly where it needed me to be. The trail led to a side junction, a narrow hallway lined with electrical panels and rusted utility doors. The GS-14 key in my pocket grew warm again. Not metaphorically, actually warm. Warmer than body temperature. I pulled it out and held it in the flashlight beam. The key vibrated slightly between my fingers. Not constantly, in pulses. 3 slow vibrations. A pause. Then 3 faster ones. Like a message. Or a warning. Or a heartbeat that didn't belong to me. My mouth went dry. I scanned the utility doors along the hallway. Most were welded shut with age. But one, A door halfway down on the left had fresh scrapes around the keyhole. Not old scratches. New ones. From hours ago. Maybe minutes. A white stencil on the metal read, Service 14, Generator Sublevel, GS14. The keys weren't random. I approached the door slowly, flashlight aimed at the keyhole. The metal around it was cold enough to frost. Frost inside a building with no active cooling system. My breath floated in front of me again. Longer, thinner. I pushed the key into the lock. It slid in too easily, like it had been waiting for this exact moment. I hesitated. The mall behind me fell into a silence so complete it felt like pressure. Like the whole building leaned in to watch. Then, a footstep behind me. Soft, barely audible, but close. Right behind my shoulder. I spun around. Flashlight up. There was nothing. No shadow. No shape. No movement. Only the faint outline of a human-sized disturbance in the dust. A fresh one. Standing exactly where someone would be if they were right behind me. Close enough to breathe on my neck. Then, a whisper. This time clear. A single word. Inside. The whisper, that single breath-shaped inside, slid against my ear like someone leaning in close enough for their lips to nearly brush my skin. I jerked away instinctively, hitting the wall with my shoulder hard enough to rattle an old fire extinguisher bracket. My flashlight beam whipped across the hall, but nothing moved. Nothing shifted. The dust just settled again in soft swirls, the same way water settles after something unseen passes through it. I looked down at the key in my hand. It vibrated again. 3 slow pulses. 3 fast. Perfect replica of a heartbeat. I didn't want to go inside. Every part of me rebelled at the thought. The generator sublevel was an off-map location. A place the property manager never mentioned. And if the mall truly lost power 9 years ago, what generator could still be operating? What needed a generator in an abandoned mall? I turned the key anyway. The lock didn't just click. It exhaled. A soft release of stale, ice-cold air washed over my hand, carrying the scent of wet concrete and something metallic, the faint tang of rust or dried blood. The door eased open an inch, its hinges protesting in a long, low groan. My flashlight beam cut into the darkness beyond. This time, the light didn't die instantly. It stretched just far enough to reveal a descending stairwell, steep and narrow, with walls sweating from condensation. The steps glistened faintly, like something had moved up and down them repeatedly, wearing away the dust. I didn't step forward. Not yet. Behind me, the intercom buzzed alive again. A strained, sputtering crackle like someone fighting to push through static. The voice came through distorted, warped, but unmistakably urgent. Don't go down there. The line cut with a sharp pop. I gripped the door frame to steady myself. Then tell me what's happening. I whispered into the air. Tell me what is moving in here. Silence. But not empty silence. Listening silence. The kind of silence that waits for you to make the next mistake. The tapping sound returned. Slow, distant, echoing up through the stairwell. Tap, tap, pause, tap. As if something had heard the door open and was answering the invitation. No, as if it was climbing. I stepped back from the door quickly, heart pounding. The tapping grew louder by a fraction, but not faster. Deliberate, methodical, something that knew I was there and wanted me to know it, too. The stairwell remained empty to the eye, my flashlight beam catching only the slick concrete, the rusted railing, and a fog-like darkness deeper than the bottom step. But the tapping kept coming, and the cadence matched the pulses of the key still warm in my hand. I slammed the door shut and twisted the lock. The metal rang out through the hallway like a gunshot. Dust rained down around me in a thin, shimmering veil. The tapping stopped immediately, but something else began. A low, rumbling groan rippled through the walls. Deeper than before, more rhythmic. Not structural shifting, not settling. A groan with timing, with intent. Something large was waking up. I backed away from the Service 14 door, flashlight trembling again. My breaths came too fast, fogging in front of my face until the cold blurred everything. I forced myself to move, following the hallway back toward the bend that led to the atrium. Halfway there, the temperature dropped another few degrees. My fingers numbed. My vision fogged at the edges. Then the lights above me flickered. Not the dead mall lights, the emergency lights. The ones that shouldn't have any power at all. One by one, they blinked on. Dim, weak, greenish-white, illuminating the hallway in a sickly glow. In that light, I saw it. A smear on the tile floor. Long, heavy, wet, not dust-disturbed. Moisture smeared in a thick arc across the path. Something had been dragged through here moments earlier. The smear led toward the atrium, and so, for reasons I cannot defend with any logic, I followed it. My boots slid slightly on the wet streak, whatever liquid it was cold enough to sting through the soles. The closer I got to the atrium, the stronger that metallic smell grew. Coppery, sharp, like old coins soaking in water. When I turned the corner, I froze. The atrium was lit, just faintly, a diffuse glow from the dying emergency lights reflecting off the upper balcony railings. The wreath lay on the balcony again, not just placed there, hung again, perfectly centered, and beneath it, on the floor of the atrium, a message, dust brushed away in long, deliberate strokes, letters carved out in clean, unmistakable shapes. Don't descend. I swallowed hard, throat tightening to a painful knot. Are you doing this? I whispered upward, as if the voice might answer. Are you warning me? The intercom crackled. Faint, weak, then almost inaudible. Run. Before I could react, something behind me shifted. Not softly, not subtly. The Service 14 door at the end of the hall slammed open with a violent metallic bang. And the tapping began again. But not from below. From the hallway. From the darkness. Fast. Eager. Growing louder. Tap. Tap. Tap tap tap. Running. Straight toward me. The tapping accelerated so fast it no longer sounded like footsteps or fingers or anything human. It was more like the frantic clicking of something with too many limbs scrambling across tile. A skittering ripple that bounced off every wall in the hall. I didn't think. I bolted. My flashlight beam jolted wildly across storefronts and pillars as I sprinted into the atrium. The cold air bit into my throat until each breath burned, but adrenaline pushed me harder. Behind me, the tapping grew sharper, louder, closing the distance at an unnatural speed. Whatever was coming wasn't slowed by the darkness. It moved through it like it belonged there. I hit the center of the atrium just as the emergency lights flickered again. They sputtered in a dying rhythm, casting the entire space in a frantic pulse of green-white illumination. Every blink felt like someone turning the world on and off, revealing the mall one jagged snapshot at a time. Blink, the empty escalator. Blink, the dry fountain. Blink, dust hanging in the air. Blink, something at the mouth of the hallway. I whipped around and aimed my flashlight back toward the utility corridor. For a fraction of a second, just long enough to question reality, I saw it. Not a shape, not a creature, a distortion, like heat rising off pavement, except inverted, cold, dense, rippling outward instead of upward. It stretched from floor to ceiling, bending the space around it in trembling waves. Dust spiraled toward it, pulled by something like gravity, but wrong, completely wrong. The distortion twitched as if adjusting its form, and the tapping stopped abruptly. Silence slammed into the atrium. Then the distortion drifted forward. Not fast, not lunging, but in a slow, predatory glide, like it didn't need to rush. My hands tightened on the flashlight enough to hurt. Something inside me, instinct, fear, whatever's left of a rational mind, screamed that this thing did not want to kill me quickly. It didn't need to. It wanted me to descend. The generator sublevel. Service 14. Everything in the mall kept pointing to that place. The keys, the warmth, the drag marks, the voice warning me, the thing chasing me. But I wasn't going down there. Not now. Not ever. The distortion twitched again, jerking to the side like a glitch in a recording. Then it abruptly froze, the rippling edges smoothing into a perfect stillness. A sound cut across the atrium. The intercom. A burst of static exploded overhead like a firecracker. The distortion flinched, actually flinched, its entire form warping sharply as though the noise hurt it. Then the voice came through, clearer than ever. "Run to the office. Now." I didn't argue. I sprinted across the atrium toward the west side where the security office sat behind a heavy wooden door. My boots slammed against the tile with punishing force. The distortion reacted instantly. The tapping started again, only this time it was a deafening staccato that ricocheted off the walls as the thing shot toward me. It was fast. Too fast. The emergency lights blinked out entirely, plunging the mall into a feral blackness. My flashlight beam barely held, but it was enough to show me the office door just ahead. I reached it, slammed my shoulder against it, twisted the handle. Locked, but the key in my pocket, the first one with the letter G, burned against my thigh. I yanked it out and shoved it into the lock. The key turned with a violent jolt, and I threw myself inside just as the tapping reached the doorway. I slammed the door shut. The impact from the other side shook the doorframe. Something struck the wood not with fists, with a dull, heavy pressure that made the entire office vibrate. The distortion wasn't trying to break the door down. It was feeling it, testing it, mapping it with deliberate, sliding movements. The sound was sickening, like wet fabric dragging over splintered wood. The intercom inside the office crackled again, though the speakers were dead. They weren't even connected to a power source. But the voice broke through anyway, quieter this time, strained almost beyond intelligibility. "You can't let it touch you." My chest tightened. "What is it?" I whispered, my voice trembling. Silence at first. Then, "It was sealed long ago." The words broke apart in static. "Generator sublevel. Not a generator. It feeds." The distortion pressed harder against the office door. The hinges creaked, metal whining as the door bowed inward by a centimeter. Not enough to break, but enough to show the thing could if it wanted to. The voice returned, hoarse, urgent. "Damon, you're not the first." A wave of cold washed over me, not just cold despair. I scanned the room frantically. The CCTV monitors were still dark except for one, the atrium feed. The grainy view flickered as the emergency systems fought to stay alive. Through the static, I saw the distortion outside the office door. Rippled, shifting, growing. Its edges were no longer vertical. They stretched outward, like arms of lightless liquid trying to feel their way across the floor. The office door groaned under the pressure. Dust fell from the frame in small bursts. The voice spoke again. I tried to stop it. Couldn't. "I'm sorry." It wasn't warning me now. It was apologizing. The distortion slammed the door again. A deep, resonant impact. The wood splintered. I backed up until I hit the desk, flashlight beam shaking violently. Then suddenly, the tapping stopped. Not gradually, cut off. The pressure on the door eased. Silence engulfed the office. Silence so heavy it hummed. I didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't blink. Then, a soft knock. 3 gentle taps. As if someone politely wanted to come in. My blood turned to ice. Then a voice. Not through the intercom. Not distorted. Not static warped. But clear, human, and impossibly close. "Damon, open the door." It was my voice. My exact voice. Right outside the office. For a full second, I couldn't process it. Not because the voice outside the door sounded like me, but because it was me. Every cadence, every breath, even the faint tremor I'd been trying to hide since the first circuit of the mall. Hearing your own voice speaking where your body isn't, it breaks something fundamental in your mind. A primal rule you didn't know you relied on. My hand tightened around the flashlight until the plastic creaked. I pressed myself against the far wall of the office, the desk digging into the back of my legs. The wooden door was bowed inward slightly from the distortion's earlier attempts to get in, and now the silhouette beneath it, that thin slice of shadow between the floor and the door, shifted subtly, as if something stood directly in front of it. The voice came again, calm, patient. "Damon, open the door. It's safe now." I didn't answer, couldn't. My throat locked up and refused to move air. My tongue felt glued in place. Silence stretched out long enough that I started counting seconds just to stay anchored. Then the handle moved, slowly, deliberately, turning in a downward arc that stopped just short of unlocking the door. "I know you can hear me," my voice said. "The office isn't going to protect you much longer." The CCTV monitor flickered violently, static chopping the atrium feed into fractured frames. But one frame repeated more than the others. A tall, rippling distortion standing perfectly still outside the office door, edges spiraling inward toward a central void that swallowed the camera's low light. The shape wasn't human, but the voice. The handle jiggled again, this time with more force. The wood shuddered. Dust poured from the hinge bracket, trickling down the door frame like sand through fingers. "Damon," the thing said, my voice sharpening into something more clipped, more exact. "You left something in the atrium." My pulse stuttered painfully, because I knew exactly what it was referring to. The coin. The warm quarter that had rolled up from the cinema level. In the chaos, I must have dropped it. But how the hell would something outside the office know that? Unless it had been following me closer than I realized. Unless it had been watching every move from the moment I stepped inside the mall. I forced myself to speak. My voice scraped out of my throat like rust from a pipe. "What do you want?" Silence. Then, "You." The handle snapped downward hard enough to jerk the metal pin inside the lock. The door frame shook. The distortion on the monitor warped into a more chaotic shape, pulsing, trembling, as though bracing itself to push harder. The intercom crackled again, impossibly loud inside the tiny room. "Don't let it in." The voice, the real one, the one that had been guiding me, was barely intelligible. Words came in bursts, shredded by static. "It mimics. Not alive. Feeds on dissent." I pushed myself against the wall harder, as if flattening into it could somehow stop the thing outside. The door bowed again, wood cracked. A deep fracture formed from the top hinge to the middle panel. Then, a single, light tap, not like the earlier frantic tapping. This was gentle, calculated. Tap, tap, tap. My voice, that impossible imitation, whispered through the crack in the wood. "Damon, we're the same. Let me in." The room went colder than ever before. Frost spread across the inside of the office window in a thin, delicate fan, as if winter itself had crawled through the walls. My breath poured out in long plumes. My fingers stiffened around the flashlight. I took one slow step toward the center of the room. Not toward the door, just away from the walls, away from any point of contact. My legs shook so badly I almost buckled. "Why me?" I managed to whisper. The imitation didn't hesitate. "You stepped inside. Not helpful. Not comforting. The opposite, like hearing that you accidentally triggered a trap in a place you didn't even know had traps." The CCTV flickered again, the distortion shape spasming with each burst of static. It pulled back from the door a few inches, rippling like a flag caught in wind. Then it surged forward, slamming its weight into the wood. The whole door bent inward. One more hit and it would break. The intercom erupted with the loudest burst of static yet, so violent I covered my ears. For a moment I thought the speakers would explode. Then the real voice pushed through, raw and breaking. "The stairs. Damon, run now." What stairs? There were no stairs in the office. But then my flashlight caught something. A faint outline in the corner behind the filing cabinet. A rectangular seam in the wall I hadn't noticed before. Almost invisible unless you knew where to look. I lunged to the cabinet, shoved my shoulder into it, and dragged it aside. The metal screeched against the tile. Behind it, a narrow maintenance hatch, barely my width, unlocked. The door outside slammed again. The top hinge snapped with a sharp metallic cry. I didn't think. I didn't look back. I pulled the hatch open and shoved myself inside. The space was tighter than I expected. A steep, ladder-like staircase descending into darkness. But not the generator sublevel. This was different, unmapped, narrower, airless. Behind me, the office door gave way. Wood splintered. Metal shrieked. Something heavy hit the floor. And then, my voice, right at the threshold. "Damon, come back." No, no. I pulled the hatch shut with every ounce of strength I had. Something pressed against the other side immediately. Not slamming, but a soft, exploratory pressure, like palms testing the surface. Then tapping. Slow, gentle, rhythmic. The intercom, impossibly faint, filtered through the wall one last time. Go down. Not to feed. To escape. I climbed. I didn't know where the stairs led. I didn't know what was below. I didn't know if the voice guiding me was alive, dead, or something trapped just like me. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever had taken my voice, whatever had hunted me through the mall, whatever had been sealed behind Service 14, it had finally gotten inside the office. And it wanted me. So I kept descending into the narrow dark, gripping the rails, breath shaking, heart hammering, whispering to myself because it was the only thing I could control. Don't stop. Don't look back. Don't listen. But behind the hatch door, echoing through the walls like a memory trying to claw its way in, I heard my own voice again. Soft, smiling. Damon, I'll find you.